September 2023, 2 decades after the original concept album was recorded, Rebecca the Musical opened in London. Written by the acclaimed duo of Sylvester Levay and Michael Kunze, and based on a 1938 novel by Daphne du Maurier, the musical has seen success in a dozen countries throughout Europe and Asia, and has finally achieved an English-language production after several ill-fated earlier attempts. The London production differed significantly from previous versions in both book and songs, and many fans felt these changes weakened the show. There's enough discussion on that topic for a whole other video, but for now, I would like to take a step back and examine the show as a whole. What if many of the London changes didn't create problems, but rather contributed to a central weakness which has been present since the very beginning? While the musical follows the plot of the book closely, it's not a faithful adaptation when it comes to themes. Of course, closeness of adaptation isn't a measure of quality, but in this case, I believe the thematic differences weaken the material, losing some of the power of the original story, and possibly even alienating some viewers. But before we talk about the downsides of those changes, we have to understand what they are. Let's take a look at some themes. Every successful musical has a central theme, and Rebecca's is the power of romantic love. The opening and closing numbers tell us this story is about Von Liebe die befreit, or in the English lyrics, the love that set me free. Maxim's love for his second wife, known only as I, helps her overcome her insecurities, and in turn, I's devotion to Maxim convinces him that his past doesn't make him unlovable. Multiple songs focus on the importance of loyalty and devotion in marriage, including 2 added and 1 repurposed in the London production. More specifically, they're all about the importance of being a dutiful and supportive wife to your husband. In the end, having overcome their struggles through love, Maxim and I live happily ever after. Despite featuring the same plot, the novel's themes are very different. In a letter to a fan, du Maurier said, "The story of Rebecca is not a romantic novel as such, but a study in jealousy." Her afterword also highlights the significance of jealousy in her conception of the story. So there we have it. In du Maurier's own words, Rebecca is not a romance. But there's much more to discover about a novel than the author's commentary on it, and jealousy is far from the only theme present. A common interpretation of Rebecca is that it's not about the power of love, but the dangers of it. The isolated and insecure 21-year-old I falls unconditionally in love with a man in his 40s who condescends to her, has unpredictable outbursts of temper, and appears drawn to her because she is so young and naive. I wish I was a woman of about 36, dressed in black satin with a string of pearls. I would like to know why you ask me to come out in the car day after day. I ask you because you are not dressed in black satin with a string of pearls, nor are you 36. Her desperate love makes her loyal to him even after finding out he's a murderer. In this interpretation, it's a story about a controlling man marrying a younger and more malleable woman after failing to mold his first wife to his submissive standards. I don't disagree with this reading, but I think it's a bit of an oversimplification to say Rebecca is about Maxim as the villain taking advantage of I as the victim. To fully understand the themes of Rebecca, we must examine it through the literary context in which it was written.
You goodness, how gothic! How gloomy, how grim!
Rebecca draws on themes from the modernist literary movement, which flourished in the first half of the 20th century. Modernism was a reaction to the rapidly changing contemporary world, and often featured commentary on the breakdown of traditional societal structures of the previous century. Several modernist novels feature the English country house as a symbol of a dying era, its custodians refusing to let go of their pre-war way of life and move into the modern world. In A Handful of Dust by Evelyn Waugh, Tony Last's obsession with his Gothic revival manor house, Hetton Abbey, leaves him oblivious to his wife's infidelity until it destroys their family. The novel ends with Hetton Abbey being downsized and fitted with modern appliances, while Tony's beloved Gothic architecture falls into ruin. Rebecca uses the destruction of the country house in a similar way. Maxim protects the reputation of Manderley at all costs, and would sooner turn a blind eye to Rebecca's adultery, would sooner murder her, rather than face the scandal of a divorce. Like Hetton Abbey, Manderley is destroyed at the end of the novel, showing the precariousness of the country house lifestyle. Another fixture of modernist novels is the coldly cruel, philandering wife. Tony Last's wife has an affair out of boredom, while the heartless Florence in The Good Soldier, by Ford Madox Ford, conceals her adultery with an intricate web of lies. These women are distinctly modern, sexually liberated, having flings in foreign hotels and private flats, uncaring towards their husbands and families, and Rebecca fits in perfectly among them. Identifying modernist tropes in Rebecca is key to understanding the themes of the novel. Maxim commits murder for a house which he places all his self-worth upon, and which is very easily burnt to the ground. The ending is not a triumph, for Maxim has failed to cling to the dying way of life that is essential to him. The couple doesn't live happily ever after, but are still tormented by memories of the past. It is Rebecca, dead before the book opens, who perseveres. Like the other modern women of the genre, she cannot be destroyed without also destroying the traditional systems she flouted. Rebecca is not a novel about romance. It's about jealousy, as Du Maurier stated. It's about the dangers of blind love, as the text itself shows, and in the context of modernist literature, it's also about the destructive results of living on borrowed time. So, are the themes of the musical less powerful than those of the book? It's a subjective question, but I personally think the answer is yes. The novel is so thematically complex that a great deal of depth was lost in transforming it into a love story. But now that we've outlined the thematic differences, let's take a look at how the musical managed to have such different themes. After all, it follows the plot of the original story very closely. The plot of the musical is very similar to the book, often taking passages word for word, so how is it so different thematically? Essentially, by removing nearly all irony and nuance from the events. Here's a few examples. The novel opens with a de facto epilogue describing the De Winters' life in the present, and it's clear that they are not completely happy. They are occupied by avoiding notoriety, staying at a small hotel which I admits is boring and says she has no affection for, and trying to distract themselves from memories of the past, often unsuccessfully. The mere mention of wood pigeons causes them both to experience what appears to be trauma flashbacks. It's a liminal existence, hardly one that can endure for very long. In the musical, this bittersweet ending is twisted into a happy one. The hotel is now a secluded romantic retreat, and the ensemble Tweely tell us that they build each night bridges made of light, and they cross them with a kiss. Another example is a song added for the London production, Free Now, in which Ai expresses her happiness at learning Maxim loves her and not Rebecca. Textually, the song is almost identical to a scene in the book.
And still I care for one thing only, repeating it over and over again. He did not love Rebecca. He never loved Rebecca. I'm free now, free to be with him. No more me now. It will be us. We'll both be free. We're together.
But the tone is completely different. In the novel, this passage fills the reader with horror as they realize the unhealthy depths of Ai's devotion. She has just learned that her husband murdered his first wife, but she is overjoyed because all she cares about is the revelation that he loves her. She swears to go to any lengths to cover up the murder committed by this man who never treated her especially well. Her happiness and self-esteem depend entirely on being loved by him. In the musical, this moment is an unquestioning triumph for the character and her romance. Songs in a major key can convey sinister undertones through chaotic structure and delivery, such as Rose's Turn or Cabaret, but everything about Free Now suggests it should be interpreted straightforwardly. These passages, among many other aspects of the book that can be interpreted as ironic or the misguided perspective of an unreliable narrator, are taken at face value in the musical. This allows the musical to follow the story very closely while presenting it as a romance.
I knew where Rebecca's body was, lying on that cabin floor on the bottom of the sea.
When the musical's faithfulness to the book is discussed, one moment is nearly always the focal point of the conversation, a moment that seems inexplicably borrowed from the 1940 film. Instead of Maxim shooting Rebecca, her death was an accident.
Suddenly she stumbled and fell. When I looked down, ages afterwards it seemed, she was lying on the floor. She'd struck her head on a heavy piece of ship's tackle. I remember wondering why she was still smiling. And I realized she was dead.
This was not an artistic decision in the film, but rather a necessity to comply with the Hays Code, which did not allow a murderous character to be portrayed sympathetically or to go unpunished. The musical had no such restrictions, and later film adaptations portrayed Maxim as a murderer. So why did the musical adopt the 1940 storyline? Michael Kunze provided the following explanation when asked by a fan. When Maxim goes down to the boathouse with the pistol, he acts with forethought. I didn't want it to be so obvious, but rather let the viewer decide whether it was manslaughter or an accident. You can see that the lack of clarity opens up many more exciting possibilities than the unambiguousness of a pistol shot. Ambiguity is a feature of the novel, but it doesn't work here, not because of this moment specifically, but because of everything surrounding it. When the rest of the musical unequivocally romanticizes the relationship between Maxim and I, there is no space for nuance when it comes to Rebecca's death. Instead, it's only natural to take it literally. Maxim didn't murder Rebecca because he's our love interest and is shown to be a good person. And because he didn't murder Rebecca, he doesn't deserve to be punished for it. Instead of depicting the deadly lengths to which a man will go to preserve his reputation, and the equally frightening lengths to which his wife will go in support of him, the story becomes a basic tale of love fighting against the forces which seek to destroy it.
Das Rauschen der Brandung. Hören Sie das? Das Meer ruft ihren Namen.
Mrs. Danvers is one of those forces. Heralded as a lesbian icon for her theatrics and all-consuming love for Rebecca, she may have been deliberately queer-coded by the bisexual Du Maurier. Another character with shades of queerness is Rebecca herself, said to have never loved men, who was murdered for refusing to abide by the rules of straight society. Even Favel's decadence is often portrayed as camp in adaptations. These characters may be the antagonists of the novel, but they're not depicted entirely unsympathetically. And perhaps more important, the protagonists are not depicted entirely sympathetically. Maxim and I may represent proper heterosexual love, but in reality their marriage is toxic and unequal. Parallels can be drawn between the subjugation of Rebecca at the hands of Maxim and the marginalization of queer people by a straight society that is far from perfect itself. But this power dynamic is flipped when the relationship between Maxim and I is adapted into a straightforward romance.
You'll never know happiness.
Yes, I will.
Suddenly, Maxim and I are the marginalized ones, fighting to be together while the evil queer-coded characters try to keep them apart. It's the power of these queer-coded characters that must be toppled so the De Winters can achieve their happy ending. And in seeing Maxim and I emerge triumphant and live happily ever after in a perfect marriage, a queer viewer might ask themselves, where do I fit into this story?
Ich wünsch mir, ich würde wissen, wie Erinnerung lebendig bleibt.
A Rebecca musical could work without romanticizing the relationship between Maxim and I, but it would be very different from LaVey and Kunze's musical. It would have to show I's biases by contrasting how she thinks of Maxim with what the audience is shown of his actions. Ideally, it should lean heavily into I's perspective like the book does, and have a darker and more cynical tone. Essentially, it couldn't be a commercialized megamusical. That's not to say megamusicals can't be dark or ambiguous, but in the case of Rebecca, the ambiguity relies on seeing the events from a single character's perspective. It's probably impossible to rewrite the existing musical to more closely adapt the book, because the love between Maxim and I is its central theme, and removing that would dismantle the entire show. The swelling chorus about love is what makes the ending feel satisfying, so if that were removed, there would be an emptiness, a pointlessness to it. Or would there? While The Love That Set Me Free seems here to stay as the heart of the musical in every iteration, the London production took a different approach to the very end. Instead of finishing on a musical climax, a rousing chorus and modulation of the melody, the London ending is more subdued. I sing solo. We hear the boom of the distant surf and remember silently, and then she trails off. Maxim gazes into the audience as if troubled before they exit together. This quiet ending captures so much better the bittersweet mood of the opening epilogue and injects a bit of complexity back into the musical. Rebecca is a successful musical beloved by many, including myself. Recentering the story around a romance has certainly not stopped queer fans from idolizing Mrs. Danvers, or fans in general from finding nuance in the characters and relationships. But it's still worth considering what was lost through adaptation, what oversimplifications we must turn a blind eye to when reading more complexity into the show. Thankfully, Rebecca is not going anywhere, and the London production showed that its creators are willing to make significant changes to the book and songs to fit a new audience. I'm excited to see what's next for the show, and I'm confident there will be things to love about every iteration.
And the moon shines bright.